Two verdicts. One afternoon, the same panel of stewards reading the same rulebook 10 minutes apart. One driver walks away clean, the other loses 5 seconds, and with it, a shot at a better result. Same team, same garage, same Sunday. And by the time this video is over, you'll understand why that gap is not really about Charles Leclerc or Lewis Hamilton at all. It's about whether Formula One still has a rule, or just an opinion that happens to carry a penalty. Here's what actually happened at Spa. On the Kemmel Straight, Leclerc defends against Oscar Piastri, moves back toward his line, and makes contact. No penalty. No investigation. The stewards call it defensible racing. One lap into the same race, Hamilton's front end washes wide under braking and clips George Russell. 5 seconds, blame placed squarely on him. Two Ferraris, two collisions. Two completely different outcomes, decided by the same room, on the same document, within hours of each other. If you want the stories the paddock doesn't put in the press releases, subscribe right now. And drop a comment telling me which country you're watching from, because what this meeting in Hungary decides is going to matter no matter where you're watching from. This isn't a rival team sniping from across the paddock. This is the man running Ferrari on the record, with a microphone in front of him, days after the race, still not letting it go. Fred Vasseur was asked directly if the Hamilton penalty was fair. His answer wasn't a shrug. Yes, because so far this season all of the incidents of lap 1 were considered as racing incidents, he said. And on this one, the person had far enough space to not close on the right and go on the left. At the end of the day, it's not me with the decision, but it seems tough. Tough is Vasseur's word. Read between it, and what he's actually saying is that the standard moved, and nobody told him when. Let's slow down and actually look at where this happened, because the location matters. The Kemmel Straight is the fastest, most violent piece of tarmac on the calendar. Cars come out of the Eau Rouge compression still light on their springs, and then the track just opens up, full throttle, nothing to manage except the gap behind you, closing faster than almost anywhere else in the sport. On most straights, a following car closes gradually and both drivers get time to negotiate the space. On the Kemmel Straight, the tow is so strong that a gap, which looks completely safe at the bottom of the hill, can be gone by the middle of the straight. The defending driver is reading all of that through a mirror the size of a postcard, while also thinking about a braking zone that isn't going to wait for him. That's the situation Leclerc was in with Piastri closing behind him. So let's put the Leclerc incident on trial the way the stewards should have. Was Piastri alongside? Not quite. His front axle hadn't drawn level. Did Leclerc do anything a driver isn't taught to do on a straight like that? No. Moving to break the toe and coming back for the braking zone is standard defending. So why does this decision feel like it moved the goalposts? Because the stewards didn't just say there was no space. They said Piastri hadn't done enough to have earned the space yet. That's not a question about what Leclerc did. That's a question about what Piastri would have done next, in a version of the race that never happened. Nobody can answer that question in real time. Keep that distinction in mind. It comes back. And the reaction from inside the McLaren garage tells you this wasn't just an academic argument for anyone watching from home. Piastri was reportedly furious over the radio in the moment, warning his own engineers the contact could have been far worse than it looked on television. On the other side of it, Russell, who was on the receiving end of Hamilton's contact one lap into the same race, was, by contrast, diplomatic afterward, suggesting his own incident was closer to a racing mishap than anything worth a penalty at all. So you have the driver who got hit and walked away with nothing, publicly frustrated, and the driver who got hit and cost a rival 5 seconds, publicly playing it down. That's not the order you'd expect if the penalty had landed on the right side of the garage. Now here's the mirror case, the one Vasseur himself can't avoid because it happened inside his own garage. Same race, same stewards, same afternoon, one Ferrari driver moves back across the track into a car that's already there, makes contact, and gets called clean. The other Ferrari driver's front tires are cold on the opening lap, the car doesn't turn as much as he's asked it to, and he gets called at fault. One of those is a deliberate change of direction, the other is a car doing what cold tires do on lap 1. And the one with the deliberate change of direction is the one that walked away with nothing. Neither ruling, taken completely on its own, is indefensible. Put them side by side, and Vasseur's own team had to argue two contradictory positions to two different stewards on the same day. And that's the part nobody in the paddock wants to say out loud. So what was Hamilton actually supposed to do differently? Brake earlier and hand Russell the position before the corner even arrives? Turn in less and risk losing the front end entirely? There wasn't a version of that corner where a cold front tire and a crowded opening lap produces a clean outcome for everybody. Pick one because those were his options. And if you think there was an obvious third one, say so in the comments, because that's exactly the kind of argument that decides which side of this you land on. And if you're not subscribed yet, this is the exact kind of story you'll want to be here for when it happens again. Now do the math on what 5 seconds actually costs. It sounds like a rounding error. It isn't. Ferrari served it in a pit window, softening the hit, and Hamilton still finished fourth instead of potentially higher. Take those 5 seconds off the clock, and the gap at the flag looks completely different. That penalty didn't just cost him a position on a results sheet, it cost him track position on a weekend where Ferrari was already fighting uphill against a faster package. 5 seconds is never just 5 seconds. It's the difference between a podium conversation and a footnote. This isn't the first time Vasseur has had to publicly push back on a call that hit his own drivers. Back at a difficult weekend in Las Vegas, when Hamilton called his own performance horrendous, Vasseur's response was to talk him down in public. "Let's calm down," he said then, protecting the bigger picture over the moment. Notice the pattern. Vasseur doesn't panic when his drivers say something raw. He picks his battles. And the fact that he chose this one, in public to journalists, tells you he doesn't think this is a small complaint. That's the same read we walked through when this channel covered the Silverstone stewarding row a few weeks back. A team boss going public isn't noise, it's a signal. Zoom out past Leclerc and Hamilton for a second because the real story isn't about either driver. It's structural. The FIA operates under two documents here. The International Sporting Code, which is broad by design because it has to cover everything from single-seaters to rallying, and the Driving Standards Guidelines, written with heavy input from drivers specifically, so incidents like this wouldn't need to be relitigated every single weekend. The guidelines say a defending driver coming back across the track has to leave one car width for a car that's there, not a car that's proven it would have completed the move. A car that's there, that's the rule the drivers themselves helped write. And at Spa, the panel didn't apply that rule. It applied a third test, whether the pass would have worked, that appears in neither document. That's not one steward misreading one regulation. That's a completion test invented in the room, with no written version anywhere a driver preparing for Monza or Baku can go and check it for themselves. Think about what that does to every driver on the grid, not just the two involved at Spa. A defending driver who squeezes a rival under the written guideline is taking a real risk because if the car behind is there, that's a penalty waiting to happen. Under the reasoning used at Spa, that same squeeze becomes almost free. If the contact itself is what stops the pass from being completed, then the stewards can always say the pass was never going to be completed. The contact ends up validating the very defense that caused it. That's the loop nobody in the paddock wants to say out loud, and it's the loop every driver is carrying into Hungary, whether or not they're willing to put it into words for a camera. Nobody defends less aggressively after a ruling like this. They defend more aggressively because the incentive now points that way. And they're going to test it at Monza, at Baku, at every single circuit on the calendar where a long straight turns a slipstream into a weapon. There's a second layer to this that should worry sporting directors even more than the drivers. A no-action verdict isn't just a ruling about one afternoon at Spa, it's a marker. Every engineer, every strategist, every team boss watching that footage back on Sunday night draws the same conclusion, that this particular version of squeezing a rival on a straight is now functionally allowed. And once one team works that out, every other team on the grid works it out within a race or two. That's how a single ambiguous verdict quietly rewrites the unwritten rulebook for an entire field, without a single word of the actual regulations changing. Now, the honest counter-argument, because it deserves saying properly. Stewards work from limited camera angles, under real-time pressure, with two teams presenting two versions of the same footage, and they're expected to be consistent across a season where every incident arrives with different circumstances. Discretion exists because a rulebook that tried to cover every possible piece of contact, word for word, would end up covering none of them properly. The people in that room aren't biased, and they aren't lazy. They're bridging a gap between a broad code and a specific guideline with judgment, because nobody handed them a document that answers this exact question. That is a defensible position. It is also not the one that survives the comparison sitting inside Ferrari's own garage on the same Sunday. Here's the part nobody in the paddock wanted written down. Was the Leclerc verdict fair because Piastri genuinely hadn't earned the position? Or because the completion test conveniently protected the home result for the driver ahead? I don't know. It isn't proven, and I'm not going to pretend it is. It's simply a question anyone watching that footage is entitled to ask, and it's exactly the question every driver is bringing into that room in Hungary. What comes next is the part nobody in the paddock wanted written down, and if you want to be here when Vasseur or the FIA respond to what happens in that meeting, hit subscribe now, not later. Because this story has a second half, and it lands within days. Do I know for certain which test the stewards should have used? No. And that's exactly the problem, because if I can't tell, and the drivers themselves can't tell, then whatever produced these two verdicts wasn't a standard. It was a judgment call dressed up as one. Here's the verdict. A rule that changes depending on who's reading it. In the room that weekend isn't a rule. It's an opinion with a penalty attached, and Fred Vasseur just said that part out loud without quite saying it in those words. Hungary is next. The FIA and the drivers are expected to sit down before a wheel turns, with the Belgian Grand Prix sitting at the top of the agenda. What the drivers want out of that room isn't an apology for Spa. It's a sentence they can actually use, something specific enough that a driver on the Kemmel Straight, with a car in his mirrors and half a second to decide, knows what he owes the man behind him before the contact happens, not after the stewards have spent an evening deciding it for him. Whether the FIA can actually give them that sentence is the open question, because broad language exists for a reason. A rulebook that tries to describe every possible piece of contact, word for word, ends up describing none of them properly. But a guideline that gets quietly overridden by reasoning nobody can find written down anywhere is worse than broad. It's unpredictable. And unpredictable is the one thing a driver doing 300 kilometers an hour down a straight cannot race against. Whatever gets agreed in that room either becomes a written standard everyone can actually use, or it becomes another unwritten understanding that evaporates the moment a different panel of stewards looks at a different piece of contact in Monza. The next contact after that won't come with Budapest's conversation attached to it. It'll come with whatever's actually written down, or isn't. So tell me, agree or disagree, the comments are the courtroom. Is this a pattern or just coincidence? Vote below and hit like if you already know which one it is. This story isn't over, and when the FIA or Vasseur says something in that Hungary meeting, you'll want to be here for it. Until the next one.